Hello and welcome back, and today we're revisiting the subject of the QNAP TS-464, but today we are looking at Emby Media Server. For those that aren't aware, Emby is kind of, I would argue, the kind of open source freeware alternative to things like Plex Media Server, and arguably it is a better platform for a number of reasons. And although I do feature Plex Media Server a lot on the channel, I'm trying to factor in Emby a little bit more, and I'm going to be targeting a lot of the kind of prosumer popular NAS devices that are going to be released in 2022 and 2023 with Emby to see how they perform. Now, a few things straight off the bat. That is right, we are utilizing the QNAP TS-464. As you can see here, it takes advantage of a quad-core Intel Celeron-based processor there. And throughout the course of our testing, we're going to be monitoring just how well that CPU holds up. And we're going to be doing that on the right-hand side of the screen here with our monitor. Now, we could use this screen here, which will detail network utilization, CPU utilization, and memory utilization. However, what we really want to focus on more than anything is the CPU. The CPU is where all the work is going to happen. As long as you've got 2 to 4 gig of memory on your Plex Media Server NAS, that's mostly all you're ever going to need. More than 4 gig is, Plex and Emby, neither one of these programs really hog the rest of the system, but it's the CPU which is going to see the most important. So if you look at the bottom, we've got all 4 cores listed here, and you're going to be seeing multiple cores being employed during this process, but the real thing to look at there is at the bottom of the screen. It's detailing just what is being utilized in terms of utilization of that CPU. Now, the next thing worth touching on is this system, although it has a combination of M2 NVMe SSD bays and hard drive bays, we're only utilizing the media on hard drive bays. If we were taking advantage of M2 NVMe's, the performance of this media would actually be a little bit better. But I think it would be be unfair to show that off in the tests, and so the multimedia we're going to be using in today's tests is living there on that thick volume there that's living on the hard drives, the 3 hard drives in a RAID 5 configuration. And as you can see, if we scroll there is all of our multimedia that we're going to be utilizing today for our testing. The last thing I want to talk about is actually having Emby Media Server, because you may not be aware, you can't find Emby on the App Center. It's been removed for some reason from the QNAP Center, so if you do want to install it, I have done a full guide on this, but just in brief, if you head up to the cog on a QNAP NAS, make sure you click the tick here that says allow installation of applications that don't have a valid signature. Do bear in mind to make sure you've got your data backed up and your network security in place. Then head over to Emby's own website, go to the support section, and you can find the download for QNAP NAS. There are a multitude of different download options for Emby, and again, lots of platforms supported there. It's just most platforms have seemingly removed Emby from their list of available players. Same goes with Kodi. Plex Media Server still seems to be there, but a lot of these platforms have removed the likes of Emby and Plex Media Server. Now, I've already added the multimedia for today's testing. I've already crawled through and got all the metadata there in the background. We're already pretty much set up to begin things on our testing. And do bear in mind, we're going to be looking at 720p, 1080p and 4K files using the compression techniques H.264 and H.265. Later in the video, I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about why they differ and where their advantages or disadvantages are. But finally, as we're utilizing this, it's also worth highlighting I am doing this recording, taking advantage of a laptop, so I'm in quite close proximity, and I am utilizing OBS screen recorder, so it will make the fan on this laptop ramp up, so I apologize if you hear that in the background from time to time. So let's play this file. This first file, if we go into the quality, you'll see, let's bring it up there, is a 720p file. And again, we're playing it now in auto mode, which generally means it's going to play its original quality when it comes to 8.264 files like this. And we're playing this over the local area network, as you can see at the top of the screen there, the IP192. Same goes up here with the network setting there, showing us the CPU utilization. And it's pretty small. If we skip around while we're accessing this file remotely, again, no real problems there. We're of course increasing the CPU every time we're doing that because we're making the system have to jump between file areas. But what we can do is orchestrate some transcoding. So even though this is 720p, we're going to ramp this file down to 360p. Now, a number of you might ask, why would I do that? Why am I not watching this file in its original 720p quality? Now, the reason for that is, and look at that enormous spike there immediately, is because the system we're utilizing here, we're accessing this over the network, and what we want is to be able to watch these files over the internet as well. So in order to orchestrate a kind of fake version of that, we're using transcoding. Transcoding is when a file gets changed to be better suited to the destination client hardware. That destination client hardware may be on a limited data connection, it may not support the same video codec, or come out of the matrix there, and ultimately during this, what we're trying to do is just show how well the NAS deals with changing files for limited internet connections or limited scope of client hardware. The other thing to bear in mind when you're doing recording like this is to make sure you've enabled the transcoding settings. Now, I didn't have the transcoding settings set up there earlier on. I completely forgot to enable it. But as you can see, we can go through its own step-by-step built-in guide from Emby to enable it. And there are different settings for how much of the CPU utilization you want to use. It's very configurable, Emby. But now we've enabled it, what we can do is head back into our Emby media server, and we can go ahead and now play that file once again. And we're going to go back to that 360p transcode there. As you can see, we're currently playing this at 360p. We can go ahead and click play, and the file is carrying on where it left off. We're seeing a larger percentage of CPU utilization across the cores and an overall arching utilization of 80-odd%, and we can still skip back and forward. So again, we can do quite a lot with our CPU working hard on this more limited file. So now we're going to ramp up to a 1080p file. We're going to go along into Little Shop of Horrors, and then from there, play that file. We're going to play it in its original quality first. Oh no, it's still remembering we're going to go to 50 megabits per second 1080p. And as we can see, we can play back that file in its original quality, skip back and forward. As we can see in its original quality, CPU utilization has gone down dramatically there to single digits. But what if we choose to do that transcoding again and reshape this 1080p file down to a 720p file? So it should be a very quick transcode because 720p and 1080p are very similar in architecture, and as you can see, we're still able to skip around very easily and with very little impact there on CPU utilization. Now we're going to go into the troublesome ones, the lower ones. We're going to go down now to 240p. This will be quite taxing for the system. And whether it can play back this file at this level of transcode, you're already able to see the CPU has really had to throw itself in to this transcode with utilization there now in the 90s, which again is quite disappointing to see, but after a little while it's able to play back that file. Again, not a lot of instances where you're going to utilize this kind of transcode, but it's still useful to know that if you are on a limited connection or using lesser client hardware and you're sharing a file to multiple sources, that you have these options open to you. Now, if we come out of Little Shop of Horrors, we can make our way into our more intensive testing here. And this is taking advantage of the Jellyfish files. Those that are followed by Plex Media Server series will know exactly what I'm talking about. These are a 30-second piece of footage I'll show you here. And we're going to play it in its original quality. So let's go back to the auto playback. This is a 30-second multimedia file just showing some jellyfishes. Why is this significant? Well, while it plays it there, if we head back into the NAS, we go into that media manager and go into our test files, you'll have a little understanding why this is so significant. Because as we look, the file that we're playing right now is this one, and it is just 10 megabytes in size. However, we have this same 30-second file in a tremendous range of qualities, going from 1080p down to 4K, going from 10 megabits per second to a whopping 400 megabits per second. These also range from H.264 to HEVC, or highly efficient video codec. As we test different files, even though it's 30 seconds in length, the files become significantly more complex. As you can see, 1.4 gigabytes for a 30-second file is going to be astronomical. That means that if this file, for that 30 seconds, every 3 minutes, that is going to be multiplied. And if you calculate that on a 90 or 120 minute film, that file size there is going to be gargantuan. These bottom 5 tests are by far the heftiest test that I have, and only a handful, and by handful I mean genuinely less than 5 NASes have been able to play these files. The other thing to bear in mind is this H.264 and HEVC. H.264 is a compression technique that has been employed to when you have large-scale movies in cinemas and huge theatrical productions. They need the means to reduce the file sizes and without losing graphical fidelity on files for home movies, for DVD, Blu-ray and digital enjoyment. So the result is they have to use compression techniques to reduce the size of those files. The majority of media in your collection that is created or released from before 2015 will be in this codec. Now, HEVC, highly efficient video codec, is a more modern compression technique and has become increasingly more common in the last year to year and a half. The problem is that H.264 has a very easy and open source patent. Well, it's not so much open source, it's just much easier to grant permission to client hardware and software than HEVC, which is a shared patent, and that is shared by multiple places. The consequence is a lot of hardware and software will not play HEVC media natively, that is to say, straight out of the box. It will force the system to have to change the file. That compression that I mentioned earlier on, it will convert the file. So in today's testing, we're going to be playing H.264 and HEVC, and the 10-bit means HDR, or 8 to 10-bit. We're going to be testing these files, even though it's the same 30-second file. It's going to be 30 seconds getting heftier and heftier and heftier to see when the NAS is unable to play anymore. So we're heading back in, we're going to exit that Jellyfish file we're playing, and as you can see, it was able to play back that original file. Now, let's look at that again, and again, playing in its original quality there, as you can see, it's going for auto direct playback, and as you can see, CPU utilization is hardly being threatened. It's less than 5%, and it's kind of going up a little bit as it plays, but still, it's not an enormously overarching amount of CPU utilization. Now we're going to play the same file using HEVC, or a highly efficient video codec, otherwise known as H.264. And when this plays back immediately, you can see that it needs to convert the file immediately. It's also utilizing all 4 of those cores immediately, with CPU utilization already at maximum at 99.7%. So immediately you're going to see that the QNAP TS-464, if your media collection is the bulk of it is made up of HEVC files, utilizing Emby to play back your files, even on the local area network, is going to use more hardware. The same goes if we go for the 3-bit HDR version, the 3 megabit HDR version. You can see that the darker white line, which is the system preparing and encoding the file and having it buffered, is only just outpacing that of playback. If playback outpaces buffering, the file stops because it's not able to play anymore. And CPU utilization, again, is in the high 90s. So, what we're going to do is play back each of the H.264 versions first, because we know those are going to be able to be played natively by the system. This is the 10-bit file. As you can see, CPU utilization has started at 5%. Sorry about the noise of seagulls in the background. I hate seagulls. And CPU utilization is still pretty smooth indeed, all the way through with some low CPU utilization there. Next, we're going to make our way up to the 30 megabits per second file. So again, this is 10 times the bit rate of the original file that we looked at in our first test. And again, Buffering is still a little slower, but CPU utilization isn't out of this world. It will go up a little bit, but it's still not crashing the end of the world there. So now we're going to move from 30 megabits to 100 megabits of 1080p H.264 quality. It plays immediately. Buffering, again, playback and buffering are a lot closer together, and CPU utilization has started a notable degree higher, but it can still play back this file. So again, if this was a 90-minute file, you'd be absolutely fine. Now we make our way into 4K files. Now 4K starts at 120 megabits per second. Now native 4K playback and transcoding can be very taxing both for Emby and Plex Media Server. Let's go ahead and play that 120 megabit file. As you can see, it's playing the original quality. It's staying ahead, not hugely, and the CPU utilization started at less than 10%, which is a good sign there for what's going on with this particular 4K H.264 file. And again, it's been handled swimmingly there by that CPU. Now we're going to make our way into our heftiest H.264 file. Again, I've seen many NASes fall at this stage. This is the 200 megabit 4K UHD file there. Let's play that one and see what happens. And as you can see, this time the playback isn't quite so confident. The CPU has immediately hit 100% there, and I believe we may have hit a wall. As you can see, the system has had to transcode the bit rate down from 200 megabits down to 120 there. It's still attempting 4K, but much like I mentioned earlier on, because buffering is only just outpacing playback, it keeps stopping. Because the system isn't getting the file processed and lined up in time to be played at exactly 1 second per second. And therefore, I would not consider this test a success. But again, this is generally where very few NASes have reached this far, and the TS-464 is already progressing further than a number of other Celeron-based NASes. So for now, let's make our way over to some of that HEVC or H.265 10-bit HDR. We're going to start with a 10 megabit file here. We'll open up on the bottom right of the screen, and as you can see, it's going to need to convert that file immediately. It's doing the auto change, and you can see that playback is only just being outpaced by encoding, but still nonetheless it's able to play back this file even if CPU utilization is dramatically high. We come out of there, now we're making our way into the 30 megabits per second HEVC file. Let's play you and zoom out. Again, opening it up, it's converted it down there, doing the auto conversion, and playback is getting real close there to the buffering, and I think this might be as high as we can take things on HEVC. The next file is going to be the 100 megabits file, but personally I think we may have reached the end of what HEVC is capable of on this system. So let's go for it with the 100 megabits per second 1080p test file there. It's playing it, we can open it up, open up the quality, but as suspected, buffering there is still just slightly outpaced by playback. And if this was a 90-minute movie, this would be deemed a failure. So I think we've pretty much found 100 megabits is just a little bit too much, and maybe you should stick with the 30s or maybe the 60s or 80s if you intend to play HEVC media. While we're here, of course, we're still going to have an attempt at playing some of that 200 and 400 megabit beefy file there. Let's go with the 200 megabit 4K file there. Again, very few NASes have been able to play this file, and I do not expect this system in order to be able to do it. Even transcoding, I think, is going to be near enough impossible for Emby and this system to play back this file. And I think right now, what we're seeing from the black screen here is that we've reached the cap of what the system can throw at this. Files like these ones, the heftier ones that reside at the quite larger scale qualities there. If we go into the file application and come out of it there and zoom out, Files like these ones at the bottom that have anywhere between 700 and 1.4 gigabytes in storage size, the result is that the system is just, it's too big. You're going to need to use a graphically enabled Xeon or maybe an i5 or even an i9 processor or an onboard graphics card if you ever intend to play files like these on your multimedia streaming setup. It's just too hefty, and as you can see, it suffered a playback error when it was trying to play it. And I think that's about it. I think we can wrap things up. This has been my Emby 4K and 1080p multimedia test of this, the QNAP TS-464. Now, if you are interested in getting a hold of this NAS, there's a full review linked in the description, as well as links to other reviews and testing that we've done on this system, with the likes of Plex Media Server, Surveillance, and virtual machines coming very, very soon. If you want to learn more, click like as I cover this system and other NASs in 2022 and 2023, and take advantage of the free advice section over on NAS Compares, linked in the description. It's genuinely free, it's manned by two humans, me and Eddie the web guy. We'll answer your inquiries. It might take us an extra day or so because we get very, very busy on there, but we try to answer every one. Even if we don't charge for it, there's a donate buttons, use them, ignore them, it's up to you. We're not going to do anything with your email, couldn't give a stuff about your email. All we want to do is help people out because we know how much it costs to hire a storage or network techie to help you set up your goods. Other than that, go ahead and click subscribe to be kept abreast of future videos, and like if you've enjoyed the video because it helps me know what I'm doing right. Other than that, I will see you next time.